questions, I'm going to provide a brief COVID report. As governor, you can do a lot of things, and some people think you can do just about anything. But as governor, I cannot control decisions made by an attorney general's office. I cannot control decisions made by a grand jury. And I don't lead local law enforcement offices. But what I can control is how I lead, what I say, what I am committed to doing. I start with the humility and acknowledgement that I will never feel the weight of 400 years of slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow. I will never personally feel that weight, but I can listen, and I can try to hear. And I can be clear that systematic racism exists in this world, in this country, and in our Commonwealth. It exists in unequal access to health care, in disproportionate incarceration rates, and it impacts everything from wealth, earnings, education, even how long we live on this earth. My faith teaches me that injustices and inequalities must be addressed. The world that God calls on us to build is one without racism, one without oppression, one without violence. Since the start of my administration, we have worked to combat some of these inequalities. We've restored voting rights, we've protected and expanded health care, and we have built an inclusive team. But as I listen and as I try to hear, I know that there is so much more work to be done. There are hundreds of years of pain to be addressed, and my job is to continue to listen, to try to hear, and to do everything I can to build the type of world that I think everybody's kids deserve, one where we live up to our true values, one where we live up to our faith, one where we try to make a dream talked about many decades ago closer to reality. Today, the Attorney General announced a mixture of the findings of his investigation and the decisions of the grand jury. We appreciate his communication with us leading up to the announcement. It allowed us to take steps that we needed to take regarding Louisville, and communication leading all the way up to the announcement. And in the announcement, he described the investigation. But he talked about information, facts, evidence that neither I nor the general public have seen. I believe that the public deserves this information. So I previously made what I would call a suggestion to the Attorney General, and now I'm making the request that he post online all the information, evidence, and facts that he can release without impacting the 3 felony indictments, the 3 felony counts in the indictment issued today. Everyone can and should be informed. And those that are currently feeling frustration, feeling hurt, they deserve to know more. I trust Kentuckians. They deserve to see the facts for themselves. And I believe that the ability to process those facts helps everybody. And I believe that no matter what somebody's perspective is on today's announcement, that they believe having the full amount of information out there, and these have been posted by other prosecutors across the nation in different situations, is hopefully something that can help us talk to each other, help us heal, help us move forward, and help us always to make improvements. I'm going to turn it over to someone who I get to work with every day, someone whose advice I've relied upon, that has been a district judge, has been the deputy attorney general, has been someone that has experienced more than I could ever claim to, and that is J. Michael Brown. And once he's done, we're going to hear from Representative Booker.
Thank you, Governor. I was not expecting to stand here today. It's a different role for me in this situation. But over these last few weeks, and many times as we've sat in his office and we've discussed what's going on, not just in Louisville, but in the world, the governor's looked to me, I think because of, not only have I spent 4 decades in the law, but I've lived through a lot of things, having been blessed to be 71 years old now. I've seen assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and Malcolm X. I've seen disturbances in the street. I was born before Brown versus Board of Education. I was alive when the Civil Rights Act passed. I served my country in a time when we were supposedly changing hearts and minds, and thought that was the right thing to do at the time. Don't regret it. But I've come to recognize that sometimes the effort to just change hearts and minds is not enough, that we really need to change behavior. The criminal justice system right now needs certain changes, not just in behavior, but in process. I think the first involves some technological issues, where rules of evidence that were developed sometimes hundreds of years ago hasn't caught up to technology, which is developed in the last 10 minutes so much. I also believe that the public has developed an expectation, rightfully so, that government and those in the criminal justice system will present to them information that they can understand in a way that they can understand it, regardless of what it is. There are certain things which are facts, whether it's a photograph, whether it's a tape recording, whether it's a report, that won't change over the course of a tribunal and won't necessarily prejudice either the defendant with the presumption of innocence or the prosecution, whose job it is to seek justice. A prosecutor's job is to seek justice. I'm not going to try to explain much about what happened with the Breonna Taylor situation in the grand jury, although I would encourage everyone to learn more about how our system really works with a grand jury and what these indictments are and what these charges are or are not. And I would have hoped that more of that explanation would have come out from a variety of sources before we got to today's result. I think what happened was a situation where expectations were built up that were not necessarily based on a full knowledge of what the legal standards were, and therefore, when those expectations were not met, there's severe disappointment. But in that disappointment, I live in Louisville, and obviously in Kentucky, which I've served for a number of years, and in this country, which I've served faithfully for a number of years. I would hope that we don't take a regressive step forward in changing behaviors. And the way we really change behaviors, and Breonna Taylor's legacy is that it can change behavior. Because more of the world, when you saw demonstrations in countries that really don't have anything to do with Louisville, Kentucky, you know that it's widespread. And I want to make one other comment before I step down, because it struck me. You know, on June 25th, I was here in this Capitol, out and around it, when Until Freedom had a demonstration here. And they had many speakers, including Mr. Crump, who I have met and known from previous engagements, so to speak, spoke to him out on the veranda there. But one of the speakers that day was Common. And it was very eloquent, but there was something ringing in my head from Common, and it came from the fact that sometimes I used to hear him almost every morning driving back and forth to Frankfurt. People talk about being woke. Well, there is a song, and it is called Wake Up Everybody. And John Legend and Common teamed up, and they made a wonderful version of it, and there's what we would call a rap part of it in the middle of it, which I think those words apply right now. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but here's what Common says in a rhythm that only I wish I could recreate. He says, "Though I'm the type to bear arms and wear my heart on my sleeve, even when I fell, in God I believe. Breathe in the days, weave through the maze and the seasons so amazing. Feed them, raise them, seasons are aging. Earthquakes, wars, and rumors, I want us to get by. But we're more than consumers. We're more than shooters. We're more than looters. Created in His image, so God lived through us. And even in this generation, living through computers, only love, love, love can reboot us." Let's follow the principles echoed by Common and Martin Luther King and a lot of other people. Let's strike the consciences of people and not the fears in people, and we can continue the change that led to the point where my next speaker could walk these halls in the General Assembly, or I could hold the position that I do now in state government.
I am State Representative Charles Booker. I represent the 43rd District, but to be more precise, I represent the Commonwealth of Kentucky and a lot of people who feel a lot of pain right now. I listened to the words of a giant, making it clear that just me being here is a testament to what progress can look like. I feel that weight right now. And our community has been through so much this year, but it speaks to generations of pain and inequity. And in this moment right now, the first thing that I want to do is recognize Ms. Palmer and Breonna's family. I have the dog tag from my cousin TJ. I carry it with me every day. They are dealing with trauma and pain that will never really go away. They have grieved before an entire nation. The world even has seen their heart break. And I know that today was just another painful chapter in a path of healing, of reconciling what can never fully be reconciled. Because Breonna Taylor should be alive today. And I also want to acknowledge a community of people who have risen up in protest, calling for justice, even in the face of being ignored, hit with tear gas, pepper bullets, demonized, called names. They've shown up every day. People like my family, Mr. Cortez, we call him C-Tez, Stachel, Katura, Shamika, so many folks that helped us ring out the cry for Breonna Taylor's name, not simply to account for what the officers did. That's critical. We'll talk about that. We're talking about that. But also to call out the fact that we have to do the deep-rooted work. That justice isn't just about what happens to these officers. It never was just about what happens to these officers. It was always about the fact that we have generations of poverty and inequity all across our Commonwealth, that so many people feel the fear of knowing that justice may not account for their humanity. I talk about it often in this building. And the truth of the matter is today, their strength is why I have so much hope. In spite of what some may want to do in seeking to cast wedges and divide us and make this a conversation about some versus others. We realize as a collective, as a commonwealth, because the people that are marching come from all corners, all walks of life. We realize that this moment is about family, and I'm proud of that truth. Let's be clear. Justice failed us today. It failed us in a way that it has been failing us for generations. We are here doing this work. I was elected to do this work because we need to make justice ring true, because it has failed. A woman, black woman, was killed in her home by the agency paid for to protect and serve her. That's wrong. There is no justifying that. And if it calls on us, and it does call on us, to change laws, to lift up Breonna's law, but to do so much more in accountability and reimagining public safety in a true sense, which is not simply more and more law enforcement being called on to be everything public safety. We have to do that work if we really want to honor Breonna. And when I leave here, I will go home to the West End of Louisville. I will see a lot of people that I love dearly hurting, even in the streets. And I want to speak to them. The last thing I'll say, this moment to me, to us, is about protecting the movement. All of us, all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky, as family, we have to do the work to make sure that we can all be free and have the liberty of being safe in our homes, to make sure that we all have the opportunity to pursue our dreams. Breonna wanted to take care of people. She should be here to pursue her dreams. We all need to commit to making community mean something, to making democracy mean something, to making justice mean something. And I'm asking you all, from every corner of this Commonwealth, lift your voices. Keep demanding change. Keep leading for change. Run for office yourself. I'm a living witness of that. But don't be quiet. Don't slow down. And most importantly, lean in with love. Love is what's going to get us through this. Love for our Commonwealth, love for one another, love for our future, our faith in one another, our faith that justice can finally ring true. Let's cling to that now, together, and keep one another safe. And we'll get through this. So that's what Kentucky does. That's what we're made of. We'll get through this together, and we will chart a course where leadership does not hide behind the law, where leadership can show the courage to speak the truth and be accountable for the lives of all of us, even if it's the life, and especially if it's the life of a black woman. Where our leaders won't preach to us and condemn us and try to tell us how to express our pain, but will acknowledge our pain and hear our cries and be accountable to them. We're going to realize that. Breonna, thank you for being the light. We'll keep fighting to honor your name.
Thank you, Representative. All right, we'll open it up for questions on this, and then afterwards I'll give a quick update on a pandemic that we are still fighting that disproportionately is taking other lives. So we'll start over here with you, Karen.
Small group of protesters outside Street Center while the Attorney General was inside listening. And as everything was announced, one said, the divide is greater now than it has ever been, and it seems like every time we take a few steps forward, we get shoved back. Could you respond? They wanted me to pass that.
The question is about some individuals who apparently had gathered outside the History Center and who expressed feelings that divide is greater than ever, and that we're moving backwards.
Every time they take a few steps forward, they get shoved back.
Every time they take a few steps forward, they get shoved back. Well, first, I want to make sure that I listen to and hear that pain and that frustration. Many people think your job as governor is to get up here and talk, and I know I've had to talk a lot. But sometimes it's to make sure that you are hearing, especially experiences that may be different from yours, but also your sincere belief that this is a Commonwealth where everybody counts. And where there are systematic issues like racism, we have to know that they are impacting the lives of Kentuckians and unfairly preventing so many from reaching their potential. And we've seen, even before some of this, or I've seen, the amount of pain that is out there. But I hope they realize our commitment, at least my commitment, in these halls and what's considered the most important office in the Commonwealth, that I want to do better. And that personally means I got to be better. And I'm going to continue to listen, because I know that the best ideas and the way we move forward aren't just going to come from me. Maybe none of those ideas come from me. But they are ideas that we are going to be able to put in place, hopefully change the Commonwealth and change the world, if we sincerely believe that we have a true duty to one another and to our God to build the world that I think he or she requires of us. Riley?
The Attorney General to release the investigative file if requested?
Yeah, the question is, does the Open Records Act require the Attorney General to release the file if requested? Obviously, I was Attorney General up until about 9 months ago, 10 months ago. It moves fast. And we had to make a lot of those decisions. There are differences between a prosecutor's file and an investigatory file, and then there are requirements that something is final. But what I can say is, regardless of what the Open Records Law requires, given that today's announcement only related to a specific officer and shots that were fired that reached a different apartment, it would seem that the investigation and/or any further movement on other actions that occurred that night are done, and that there can't be any prejudicing any jury that's out there, because according to today's announcement, there won't be any. And so I think that it's time to release those ballistics reports. And listen, I appreciate that the Attorney General talked in detail about them. Those are the types of facts that can help us process. And he talked through it today, and he didn't shy away from the fact that there was inconsistency in them. Again, I trust people if they are able to get that information. And so what I'd like to see is all that put online, those pieces of evidence, those reports, so that people can truly read them and process them, and that conversations we need to have moving into the future, if they're about this specific incident, can be based on it, or if there are things we can learn. And I think we all agree, and everyone, law enforcement and other, agree that we should learn every single time that there's a tragic occurrence about what we can do better. Mark?
Representative Booker said that it wasn't just about the officers, it's about generations of inequity and inequality. So what can the state of Kentucky do to change that? And do you have any proposals that you're thinking about in the governor's budget proposal to try to address that?
So the question comes off Representative Booker's eloquence and speaking his truth, and thank you for doing that today. That's what these walls of this Capitol should be about, and that's what we all need to hear and listen, and I hope everybody out there is hearing and listening. And Representative Booker talked about how justice deals with hundreds of years of inequities, and I believe that we have to start directly addressing them and be intentional about it every day. One that I've been intensely focused on is healthcare, because in the midst of COVID, we have seen our Black and African American Kentuckians dying at twice the rate they make up of the population. And it's no secret why. It is inadequate access to healthcare. This is something that Dr. King talked about so many years ago, about being one of the greatest forms of inequality, and shame on us for not solving and resolving that before now. We've launched a campaign directly aimed at the Black and African American community, aimed at signing every single individual up for some form of health care. That's going on right now. And we're gonna move further after that to get everybody in the Commonwealth signed up for health care. But I'd like to think that step is finally showing priority for a community that for far too long we haven't shown priority for. It's about building wealth, not just creating jobs in an area, but building wealth in a community where we haven't provided those opportunities, providing educational opportunities and knowing different things that we have to do to get there. You know, there are studies that show it's a fact that an African American teacher can have an incredible impact on minority students, and you see that in the outcome. We got to step up, work with our HBCUs to make sure that we have those programs in place, and we are continuing to improve it. We need more programs to recruit more Black and African American Kentuckians into our law enforcement, to ensure that law enforcement and everything else look like the rest of our Commonwealth. We've got to make sure that we don't have laws, whether it's insurance or others, that make it harder for some individuals to move ahead in different ways than others, banking laws too. And for years we have had programs, rightfully so, that invest in Eastern Kentucky and invest in Western Kentucky. I've made those announcements. We need those same type of programs, and I proposed one in our budget this last year that invests in areas like West Louisville. It's time for us to step up and do our part so that, for me, and what it keeps coming back in the next pandemic, we're not just repeating the same things. Because we've seen and we're hearing about the pain of this individual situation today, but the pain in a pandemic where systematic racism in our healthcare system has resulted in countless more people dying than they should is one that I feel every day reading off the counties and the ages. One more before you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you believe justice was done today?
Well, I believe, the question is, do I believe that justice was done today? Being a former prosecutor and attorney general, I think that we need to see the facts, the evidence, and that I hope moving forward there's more explanation of process and of what certain things require. I know that that Mrs. Palmer, who I've met, who stood right here, actually we were in the Supreme Court's got to be in a lot of pain today, and I can't imagine losing one of my children. But I think having more of the facts out there to where people can see and people can truly process it is where we need to be. The Attorney General spoke today about the truth, and I agree our commitments to the truth. I'd just ask him to provide more of the tools for everyone to be able to evaluate and to determine what that truth is. I never expected when I was Attorney General for people just to rely upon my judgment. I wanted to make sure that people saw the reasons for what we're doing, and there's still the opportunity to do that there. I don't think that there was a response today to a question about what might be forthcoming there. Tom, and then Catherine.
And Representative Booker and Secretary Brown want to weigh in on this too. Since Representative Booker obviously talks to the people of his community, Secretary Brown's got vast experience in the legal world. You're a former AG. Is there anything that you have been able to detect thus far that perhaps the investigation was flawed in any way? That it, you know what I'm saying?
So the question is, have I determined that the investigation was flawed in any way? I'd need to see the evidence. I'd need to see the statements. I'd need to see what was and wasn't done to have any comment on that. I think that everybody looking back wishes that things had been done differently, not in the investigation sense, but certainly in what happened that night. And there have been a number of things suggested since that I think shed a little bit of light on that, about what it ought to take to get a no-knock warrant, even though when it was executed, apparently there's a question about whether it was executed as a no-knock warrant. Who should be able to execute a no-knock warrant? What type of training that takes? because that's a very different situation. In most parts of our state, law enforcement never conduct one. And most of the time, at least what has been explained to me, it's conducted by a highly trained group and unit. What type of surveillance needs to be done ahead of time before one to again reduce the risks? These are all things moving forward that we need to look at both from a process standpoint and as a legal standpoint. You know, if I had a wish and I talked about it during the investigation period, it was just for more explanation. I think people need to understand process. They need to understand elements, and that's not talking down to people. It's just giving people information that I think that they need to take what they hear and put it into some type of context. When we have such a vacuum in something that we are so passionate or so frustrated, or when we have a vacuum of information, it makes it so much harder on us personally and emotionally and those that are involved. Do you want to add to that, or? Okay. Catherine?
What's your message to demonstrators who are taking to the streets tonight who are upset with hearing this decision?
The question is, what's my message to demonstrators? Well, first, I will listen and I want to hear. And I truly want a better world for your kids and for mine. And while this is an unfair, inequitable world to your kids, then my kids aren't living in the right world either. I believe that I have a duty to my faith and to my commonwealth to make sure that we do so much better, and I want to be a partner moving forward. I will never, ever tell someone not to give voice to their truth or to speak out for what they believe in. But I would ask that we not engage in any type of violence, and that we not put ourselves in a position, and that people not put themselves in a position where someone can hijack what they are trying to do, can try to incite violence around them. We've already seen some militia groups walking through downtown Louisville. So be safe, and the eyes of the world are on Louisville. People will hear. There are more cameras broadcasting to more places. And so I'd be mindful that they're here, but also that you're heard, and let's try to do this in a way that makes positive change and is not used to prevent change. Joe?
Attorney General Cameron today declined to talk about several aspects of the process of the grand jury, such as whether prosecutors recommended certain indictments or not, the racial makeup of the grand jury, stuff like that. Do you think that those are parts of the grand jury report that he should reveal publicly?
The question is about different questions the Attorney General was asked today about the grand jury proceeding, and you do have to be careful in a grand jury proceeding about what you can and can't disclose, though there have been situations. One was after the fact, but in Ferguson, where transcripts and evidence were released almost in the whole. I certainly think that a legitimate question is the racial and demographic makeup of the grand jury. I think that that's something that I hope they reconsider responding to. I mean, in a city of Louisville that is already so diverse, I don't think it will give out anybody's identity or compromise who they are. And provided that it is sufficiently diverse, it may give people just another piece of information that they can process.
Secretary Brown, do you believe the expectations were too high for people going into this about the repercussions that would happen to the officers that were involved in that?
The question is, did I believe the expectations were too high for people leading into this? And you know, Secretary Brown is speaking his truth based on his experience. I don't know exactly where people's expectations were, but I believe it's really hard to put in context a decision today without knowing what it took to get to that decision, or what it would take to get to another decision. I know that, especially when you're hurt, that without explanation in a vacuum of information, It can be incredibly tough, and that it's not viewed in isolation. There are other incidents that have gone on around the United States. Now, there were an indictment today with 3 felony charges, but I think trusting people with the information and putting it out there so that at least they can evaluate. I just think that's the right thing to do. And again, I think General Cameron believes in truth, and I believe in truth. I'd just like for people to see the information so they can determine the truth.
Do you feel like drug crimes in Kentucky are enforced appropriately, and do you think there's any room for reform in that aspect?
The question is, do I think drug crimes are enforced correctly in Kentucky, and what are some potential changes there? But first, obviously, we have an addiction crisis in the state. I believe that the best way to address that is to help people get better and to give especially kids, but people as they grow older, the tools to not fall into addiction in the first place, but then the job skills and the help that people need to get out of it and to stay out of it. And I will say the only way I believe we win the war on drugs, if it's still even that, is to help people, not to incarcerate people. It's about impacting the demand and not the supply. There are so many really dangerous drugs out there. I understand why we have enforcement. When we have things like fentanyl that can kill you the first time you try it or even harm people when they touch it, we have to recognize that. Now, I also think that it's never a wrong thing to step back and to look at actions we take in any of our processes. I was just talking with Secretary Brown, who was working with the city of Louisville when they ended high-speed pursuits by law enforcement based on what can happen and the danger that it can create. And so I certainly think that it's something that we can all look at in a form of improvement about when you would undertake certain activity, based on the likely harm coming out of it, but also the harm to other people that can occur. Do one more. We'll go. I'll get you. Go ahead, Karen.
There was some fear and anger today, and have been over the last few days, of police presence, and then downtown in Frankfort, people noticed snipers, and of course the National Guard presence. So there's concern that there's an expectation now of violence. Could you reiterate why those measures are being taken?
The question is why certain measures are being taken from a law enforcement standpoint. And I do want to make sure I mention one thing. There was a question. The question included people in downtown Frankfort, including, and the term was used, snipers. Those are not snipers, and I want to make sure that I understand. So in any circumstance where state police or others are trying to ensure security, they do want a high vantage point so that they are able to see what's going on all around. That's standard, and that's not intending to put anybody in a quote-unquote sniper position. Our goal, and today I authorized a limited deployment of the National Guard. Our goal is to make sure that we can keep everybody safe. We've got a militia walking around. I think they broke with the 3%ers downtown Louisville. We've got others that would take what is otherwise a peaceful rally, demonstration, protest, and would like nothing more than to see people harmed. We've got some critical infrastructure. I'll give you an example, hospitals right now that we have to make sure stay open and aren't disrupted in a time of COVID or anything else. I know that it can be hard to see that presence, and I know that there are some that disagree with it, but I can tell you from my standpoint, why it's being done is to make sure that anyone and everyone can express their First Amendment rights, but that they can do so safely, that no one can incite violence, and that critical infrastructure can continue to operate in times where it has to. Riley?
Just a little more on the National Guard issue. This is something that a lot of people are really scared of when they hear that the National Guard has been deployed to Louisville. What assurances can you provide that basically what happened in late May, with David McAtee at 26 and Broadway, it doesn't happen again?
The question is on the National Guard, and it's hard to believe as governor in different ways. I think I've had to deploy the National Guard 5 separate times. Now, some of those are to assist county clerks in voting and others, but this is certainly during COVID. Remember, at one point we had them at hospitals when we thought that there could be a rush and wanting to make sure there's order there. I can assure citizens of Louisville that the National Guard deployment is limited. It is based on very specific operations, and that it is under the command of the National Guard and no one else. Each of the Guard's men or women know what their job is, and it's not the forward-facing role that LMPD is playing and has much more experience with. My commitment is to make sure that something like what happened to Mr. McAtee, regardless of the reasons that it happens, don't happen again. Because regardless of the circumstances of that situation, which are a part of litigation right now, we want to make sure everybody, absolutely everybody, is safe throughout this. This deployment is much more similar to Derby, much more limited in scope to what happened previously. And again, there is a different command structure in place this time. And you can bet I'm getting updates as frequently as I can. Mark? Yeah.
2 or 3 specific pieces of legislation the General Assembly could pass this year that would either A, prevent future shootings like what we saw with Breonna Taylor, or B, address the generations of inequity and poverty.
So the question was about specific pieces of legislation that could address the circumstances evolving around Breonna Taylor, but then also the broader conversation about inequity. And so we already have, that has been pre-filed, Breonna's law that deals with no-knock warrants and also body cameras and requirements with that. We understand that's just a start in the broader process. We have the opportunity to expand citizen review of police shootings and secure subpoena power for them so that the community has more access to the information about trauma that's affecting them from the agency they pay for. But in terms of like the broader conversation of inequity, there's a piece of legislation that has been filed actually by Senator Gerald Neal. We're hearing more about this at the national level as it's been elevated through COVID. How we have impact assessments for every piece of legislation to determine how it impacts Black community. Dealing with racism at a structural level is going to require us to look at every single policy, every budgetary decision, and so legislation like that would be an important step to where we're being intentional about rooting out our blind spots. And then I think the governor was correct in terms of how do we build wealth and not just look at economic opportunities in terms of jobs. That requires justice, and it requires us to have an investment in communities that have been marginalized and disadvantaged for generations. We have the opportunity to do that now with small business support, with training and capacity building, but also with direct justice. At the national level, it's been discussed for years about reparations. We should finally have that conversation in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We can do those things together as family, all of us, and I'm definitely going to be a part of that, even though I won't be here next year. You'll keep hearing from me, that's for sure. I'll still be here, of course.
I'm pretty sure Representative Booker will be here. Maybe a different title, but still be here. Tom?
Governor, the Attorney General also announced a task force that will be looking into the process for securing, reviewing, and executing search warrants in Kentucky that he said will include citizens, members of the law enforcement community, the judiciary, elected officials, and what have you. Are you on board with that, and would you like to have your office represented?
The questions on the AG's task force that he proposed, we would certainly serve on that task force. I think that it is a good idea. It could perhaps be merged into a group that's been meeting of legislators, administration, and others on maybe a slightly wider variety of topics. It could be merged into discussions we have had with the Black Legislative Caucus and separately that I've had with law enforcement about different ways and processes that could be better. And so we always should want to do things better. So no, that is an idea that we would be more than happy to participate in. And action, inertia, movement are important.
Kentucky State Police, you mentioned the National Guard mission, how it's limited in their command. Can you describe in more detail what Kentucky State Police is?
So the questions on the Kentucky State Police, there is also a limited group of Kentucky State Police officers that are assisting in Louisville, but once again, they are their own unit. They are under Kentucky State Police Command. They are there to provide additional assistance if needed. They have training more akin to what LMPD has, as opposed to some of the Guard. But they'll be serving specific requests and missions, but as their own unit in Louisville.
Did you just indicate that you're going to give Representative Booker a job in your administration? And two, I'm hoping to understand this in their own command for National Guard and KSP a little bit better. I mean, what exactly does that mean? I guess, like, are they still going to be deployed?
They're not. Yeah. So it's a two-part question. One, Representative Booker and I have not talked about a job to date. I know he's got a lot going on, and we've talked about some other great initiatives that he's pushing, but we're always open to have that other conversation too. The second piece is trying to understand what I meant under their own command. So in the initial deployment to Louisville during especially those first couple nights where things were concerning, the Guard was sent out around Louisville based on instruction and command from LMPD. We were integrated, if you will. While we will have an LMPD officer with each group of Guardsmen or women, that's necessary because there's no police power in and of itself in the Guard is answering to the Guard. I have the Adjutant General there in Louisville, back and forth. We have the command structure on site while they are talking certainly with LMPD, with federal agents and others that are out there, because there's more groups this time than last time. Every decision that's made as to where the Guards go and what the Guard do is made by the Guard. Likewise, KSP decisions are made by KSP and only KSP.
Where are talks at now regarding the possibility of a special session to deal with police reform? And maybe Representative Booker can also talk about this. What do you hope to actually see out of those talks and out of a possible special session?
Talks on a special session continue. The things that I put out there that we would be required to call a special session, though, we're still looking for and we're not at yet. Number one is that any progress would have to be substantial. It can't be window dressing. It can't be done just to look like we are trying to do something. It has to mean that we are truly going to move the Commonwealth forward. I'm not into calling people here just for a show. The second is we have to have agreement ahead of time. It's $60,000 a day, so we want to make sure that that we have that as we come in. We are not there yet, but we have reached out to numerous groups. I believe that there is some common ground. I think it needs to continue to be refined. And then the question is, what's possible today? Does it meet that real progress? And if it doesn't, even the Black Legislative Caucus has said they want to wait until the regular session because, again, they don't believe that window dressing is appropriate just to make a statement right now that real progress is what's requested. All right. Now, I know that But this is the issue on everybody's hearts and mind today. And I hope those out there won't think that the switch I've got to make is callous, but we are still dealing with a worldwide health pandemic. And today we're reporting 796 new cases of COVID-19. 111 of them are in kids 18 or under. It brings our total number of cases to 63,517. And today we're reporting 5 new deaths, bringing our total death count to 1,124. So what I'd ask is everybody, including those that may march tonight or those that are going to go inside their house of worship, which I know is a call that was made and one that I support, please, please, please wear a mask, especially if you're inside with a group of people. We need you to wear a mask. No one would want to turn a moment of unity, of giving voice, of trying to make progress into one that spreads a virus. So please make sure you do it safely. I know you will. But this is so important when, sadly, with inequality in healthcare, when our Black or African American community members contract COVID, right now they are more likely than others to pass away from it. We've already talked about one tragic loss today. Let's make sure that we prevent others. Our positivity rate as of today is 4.59%. We had a significant number of tests that came in. We're now at almost 1.3 million tests administered since the beginning of COVID-19. Those we've lost include a 99-year-old woman from Christian, an 83-year-old man from Marshall, an 84-year-old woman from Jefferson, a 50-year-old man from Jefferson, and an 81-year-old female from Jefferson. New cases by county, 194 in Jefferson, 56 in Barron, 38 in Fayette, 33 in Warren, 27 in Davis, 20 in Hardin, 18 in Bullitt, 17 in Whitley, 16 in Kenton and in Knox, 14 in Boone, 13 in Estill, Henderson, Madison, Montgomery, Oldham, 12 in Knott, 11 in Scott, and the rest are going to be online. Also online, we have the case, the racial and ethnic breakdown. It's been fairly stable, but again, it shows challenges that we have. We hope later in the week to have Halloween guidance. The CDC is certainly very different from where Ohio is, and so that's an update we will have further into the future. We've hit 5, so we'll ask people save their COVID questions if you can for tomorrow. I want to thank you all for being here. I wanted to be governor to do everything I could to build a better world. And I never knew different ways that we'd be called upon to do that. My prayer is that we can achieve that. My prayer is that I will be able to listen and hear and have the courage to do what's necessary to create justice, to move forward, and that all of us can do, whether it's those small or those big things, to move closer to the world that I think God calls us to create. Thank you all.